Oh, good morning. My name is Camilo Lega Barco, and I am pleased to present the chapter authored by myself, Fernando Castelló Sirvent, and Marta Peris from the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. Um, our research begins with a paradox. Innovation is routinely described as the engine of competitive advantage. And in the Colombian private housing industry, the firms that innovate the most are not always those that prosper more durably. Materials, digital coordination tools, and alternative construction methods are all available and internally proven, yet firm level innovation remains incremental, episodic, and concentrated in a small minority of firms. The dominant strategic equilibrium is non-innovation, not because firms are unaware of the alternatives, but because the competitive logic of the sector makes repetition rational and experimentation costly. So that raises three research questions. Number one, how do path-dependent routines function as a competitive strategy, and what logic sustains the non-innovation equilibrium? Second, through what firm-level mechanisms do Schumpeterian innovations sense, seize, and sustain competitive advantage? And third, how do appropriability conditions shape incentives for innovation and cumulative trajectory learning? So we build our argument on three interlocking constructs. First, on Schumpeterian competition, where advantage comes not from price equilibrium, but from entrepreneurial innovation that creates temporary monopolies, later eroded by imitation through creative destruction. Second, the research-based view, where firms are heterogeneous bundles of routines, relationships, and reputational assets, and where path dependence becomes both strategic strength and strategic trap. And third, dynamic capabilities teases idea of sensing, seizing, and transforming, which explains how firms modify their resource bases, right? So we situate capability activation within the TOE framework, technology, organization, environment, which asks which contextual dimension is actually binding. As we will show in Colombian housing, technology is not the constraint. It's really down to organization and environment. So our methodology is based on 15 semi-structured interviews with 16 senior actors spanning the Colombian housing value chain. We contacted developers, project managers, architects, engineers, contractors, prop tech founders, financial executives. We even had some professional association and public officials participate. We used a multi-domain domain protocol covering barriers, enablers, alternative technologies, structural challenges, and diffusion consequences. The interviews were conducted in Spanish, transcribed, and then coded in vivo across three iterative analytic cycles, moving from first-order descriptive codes at the beginning to get to know our data. And then we aggregated the analytical dimensions through abductive logic. This approach is appropriate because our aim was to create a mechanism-based explanation, not hypothesis testing. So our first finding is that the dominant firm-level logic is not anti-innovation, but rather pro-stability. One developer put it clearly: builders like to repeat. have the lowest probability of error, because that means cost overruns and therefore loss of competitiveness. An electrical designer was starker, said profitability rules. The numbers work, they don't change anything. Right? A prop tech founder with experience across more than 100 firms noted the main obstacle is we've always done this in this way. But the casual direction runs from structural conditions to culture, not the reverse, right? So the we've always done it this way mindset is the cognitive crystallization of a competitive equilibrium in which deviation generates cost rather than returns. Using the TOE framework, the binding constraint is organizational and environmental, not technological. The technologies are there. What is missing is the rational incentive to use them. Despite the dominant equilibrium, a minority of firms do compete through innovation. We analyze them through the sensing, ceasing, transforming triad proposed by Tees. Sensing is most visible in prop tech founders and innovation-oriented consultants who scan across industries and international markets. Ceasing requires the developer or integrator, as we've termed them, to absorb the coordination cost and execution risk without guarantee that the client will recognize the improvement. A structural engineer who built a steel frame niche captured this powerfully. I have to demonstrate it. I have only one project to get it wrong. People who realize that you do things with quality, that is what allows for crazy ideas or innovations to be accepted. Authorization to innovate is earned through reputational accumulation, not through technical superiority. So the system is mostly trust-based. Transformation is the least visible. One developer noted that construction is more like a sculpture than a factory. Each project starts from zero, which makes codifying learning uniquely difficult. And so critically, every case of sustained Schumpeterian innovation in our sample traces to a specific individual. Capability in the sector is managerial and not organizational, and therefore it's fragile. If the person leaves, the innovation leaves with them. Our third and perhaps most distinctive finding concerns appropriability, the innovator's ability to capture returns from innovation. So in the Colombian construction industry, the dominant mode of procurement is based on unit price analysis, or known as APU in Spanish, which is Análisis de Precios Unitarios. APU forces contractors to decompose their prices into component costs, making the production process transparent and having the unintended consequence that it destroys the Schumpeterian reward for innovation, right? Because once you price in, the people will see how you produce your goods, and it makes it very hard for you to compete based on differences. One engineer captured the logic through a Coca-Cola analogy. He said, if a Chinese supplier came and said, if I studied the process, I've done the lab work, these piles are hollow. He's speaking about the foundation system for the Bogota Metro. And you ask for a unit price decomposition, it's the same as asking Coca-Cola to give you the unit price decomposition per bottle. They say drink, leave it, right? Which means in this way you cannot see what I'm doing. The same engineer concluded, why would I make the structure lighter? That come out heavier since you're paying me by the kilo. So when this type of logic that promotes short time savings is dominant, as it is in the industry, innovation is going to be actively penalized. So 3 insights follow from the interaction of these findings. First, the non-innovation standard is structurally produced not culturally determined. So interventions that are focused on culture or managerial awareness without changing the structural incentives will have limited effect. Second, dynamic capabilities are managerial rather than organizational, so they depend on the person. They make competitive positions fragile and sector learning discontinuous. When innovation leaders exit, the capability evaporates. And third, appropriability mechanisms are informal and fragile. Innovators build Schumpeterian positions through opacity and reputation, but fail to codify them into transferable organizational assets. So the sector resets every project and doesn't accumulate. It does not compound. So some implications for firms and for sector level policy. For individual firms, sustainable competitive advantage in the sector requires simultaneously giving attention to three things. Number one, capability development. Number two, reputational asset accumulation. And number three, an appropriability strategy. So technical capability is not enough. You need to gain trust and you need to protect your intellectual property. These things are necessary to sustain price opacity. Competitive positions built on technical capability alone will erode rapidly because of the way that procurements work. On the other hand, for sector policy interventions that target firm capability in isolation will be insufficient. Procurement institutions, particularly the APU regime, margin environments, and buyer quality assessment capacity all require direct attention. So there needs to be some training for firms to innovate without changing the conditions that make innovation unrewarding. Rather, training them without changing the conditions will make innovation unrewarding and will not shift the incentive structure. So for future research, we think that researchers should examine ecosystem level conditions that should shape firm level Schumpeterian condition in the industry. The procurement institutions, the financial gatekeeping conditions that shape the margin environment, and the regulatory frameworks that determine innovation admissibility all operate at a level that is way beyond the firm, right? This is systemic. So these types of conditions will shape the selection environment within which firm level dynamic capabilities are or are not rewarded. In the future, we think neo-Schumpeterian mechanisms should be explored, drawing on Nelson and Winner and Windrum and Garcia-Goñi, who provide promising theoretical architecture for ecosystem level analysis in this vein. Thank you.